main themes of current politics is style
Remember that for women, men are slave choice. And this hasn't really been mentioned or that mentioned during the whole time we've been together, so I felt that it was something to bring up.
שיר השירים אשר לשלמה. Oh, that you would kiss me with the kisses of your mouth. Draw me after you, let us make haste. The king has brought me into his chambers. I am dark, but I am beautiful.
You have ravished my heart, my sister, my bride. You have ravished my heart with a glance of your eyes. How much better is your love than wine, and the fragrance of your oils than any spice. Your lips distill nectar, my bride. Honey and milk are under your tongue. The scent of your garments is like the scent of Lebanon. A garden locked is my sister, my bride. A garden locked, a fountain sealed, a garden fountain, a well of living water and flowing streams from Lebanon.
I am my beloved, and my beloved is mine. He pastures his flock among the lilies. As an apple tree among the trees of the wood, so is my beloved, and his fruit was sweet to taste. Refresh me with apples, for I am sick with love.
Under the apple tree I awakened you. There your mother was in travail with you. There she who bore you was in travail. Set me as a seal upon your heart, for love is as strong as death. Its flashes are flashes of fire, a flame of Yahweh himself. John of the Cross. Entrado sea la esposa en el ameno huerto deseado, y a su sabor reposa el cuello reclinado sobre los dulces brazos del amado.
Clare of Assisi. Draw me after you, heavenly spouse. We shall run in the fragrance of your perfumes. I shall run and not grow weary until you bring me into the wine cellar, until your left hand is under my head and your right arm blissfully embraces me, and you kiss me with the most blissful kisses of your mouth.
John of the Cross. In the inner wine cellar I drank of my beloved. The bride has entered the sweet garden of her desire, and she rests in the light, laying her neck on the gentle arms of her beloved.
Hildegard of Bingen. O viridissima Virga. O most greening branch, hail, hail, because the heat of the sun exudes from you like the perfumes of balm. The beautiful flower came forth from you, which gave all aridness their aromas. Then the skies rained down dew on the fields, and all the earth rejoiced, because the warmth of the sun exudes from you like the perfumes of balm. The beautiful flower blossomed from you. Then, O sweet virgin, you know only pure joy. The birds in the windy air build their nests in your hair. Eve turned her back on all of this, but now let there be praise to the highest.
John of the Cross. Beneath the apple tree, there I took you for my own. There I offered you my hand and restored you.
Teresa of Avila. It pleased the Lord that I should see an angel, very beautiful, his face so aflame. In his hands, I saw a long golden spear, and at the end of the iron tip, I seemed to see a point of fire. With this, he seemed to pierce my heart several times, so that it penetrated to my womb. When he drew the spear out, I thought he was drawing my womb out with it, and he left me completely afire, with great love. The pain was so sharp that it made me utter several moans, and so excessive was the sweetness caused me by this intense pain that one can never wish to lose it, nor will one's soul be content with anything less. Love comes with a knife, not some shy question and not with fears for its reputation. Think of the spiderweb, woven across the cave where Muhammad slept. There are love stories and there is obliteration in love. I have no more words. Let the soul speak with the silent articulation of a face.
Did you hear that winter's over? The basil and the carnations cannot control their laughter. The trees reach out their congratulations. The soul goes dancing through the king's doorway. Lilacs blush because they have seen the rose naked. New creatures whirl in from non-existence. Galaxies scatter around their feet. Have you met them? A feast is set. Listen, the wind is flowing wine. Love used to hide inside images, no more. Nothing can stay bound or be imprisoned. You say, end this poem here and wait for what's next? I will. Poems are rough notations for the music we are.
Radha to Krishna. Krishna, come quickly to meet me. Death is better for me than living in my vacant body. Why do I endure love's devouring flame?
Krishna to Radha. Leave lotus footprints on my bed of tender shoots, Radha. Let my place be plundered by your tender feet. I stroke your foot with my lotus hand. You have come far. Set your golden anklet on my bed like the sun. Consent to my love. Let elixir flow from your face to end our separateness.
Radha to Krishna. My lord, your hand is cooler than sandbalm on my breast. Paint a leaf design with deer musk here on love's vessel. Lover, draw paint glossier than a swarm of black bees on my eyes. Kiss away the lamp-black bow that shoots arrows of love. My ears reflect the restless gleam of doe eyes, graceful lord. Hang earrings to form snares for love. Make a mark with liquid deer musk on my moonlit brow. Make a moon shadow, Krishna. Fix flowers in shining hair loosened by love play. Paint a leaf on my breasts. Lay a girdle on my hips. Twine my heavy braid with flowers. Samsara and Nirvana are the tambour and the drum. Mind and breath are the flute and the cymbal. The sound of the kettle drum rises in the sky. Birth is consumed, and the highest dharma is dowry. Day and night pass in love play. In the troop of yoginis, night becomes dawn. Yogis find delight in the embrace of the Dombi, and do not leave her for a moment, being drunk with simultaneously arisen bliss.
In the sky above the sky, there is an overgrown garden. There is the spade of the heart. When at the neck the delightful girl awakens, it is unearthed. Abandon, oh abandon your old mother. In love play, the Savara has taken the beautiful maid. My overgrown garden yields the cotton of the sky, for now the white cotton flower has blossomed. By the side of the overgrown garden, the maize garden appears. Darkness dissolves, sky blossoms forth. The Savara and the Savari drink deep. Every day the Savara perceives nothing, being giddy with love play. In 10 directions, the Savara obtains nirvana.
At midnight, the lotus is in full bloom. lit by the rays of the Vajra. The 32 yogis delight their limbs in the place of great bliss. The moon is driven to the Vajra summit. The jewel speaks of simultaneously arisen bliss. The moon drifts to the light of nirvana. The lotus is carried to the lotus pool. Bliss of cessation is purified at the moment called without things. Whoever understands this is a Buddha.
It strikes me there's a special sensitivity and wisdom in Jewish culture with regard to hospitality. And this for at least two reasons. There is, of course, the history of expulsions that the Jewish people have experienced over the centuries. They know what it means to be unwelcomed. And the second reason is that the fact that Jews have watched over the centuries how Christians have taken up residence in the house of Israel, and by taking over their scriptures, and sometimes in the process terribly distorting them. So I look forward to our discussion this afternoon. Our first speaker is Professor Edward Kaplan, who is the Kaiserman Professor of the Humanities and Chair of the Department of Advanced Languages at Brandeis University. He's probably best known for his two-volume work on Abraham Joshua Heschel. The first volume was published in 1998, and it was co-authored with the late Samuel Dresner, and it was entitled Abraham Joshua Heschel, Prophetic Witness. The second volume appeared in 2007 and was entitled Spiritual Renewal, Abraham Joshua Heschel in America, 1940 to 1972. And that volume was recently awarded the National Jewish Book Award in American Jewish Studies. Please join me in welcoming Professor Edward Kaplan.
For the soul, home is where prayer is. Yes, we are in exile in the world. Heschel suggests one task of religion is to transform exile into a pilgrimage, a lonely journey into a goal. For God's hospitality is infinite, always available to the pilgrim, to the stranger. And continuing with Heschel. What is a soul without prayer? A soul runaway, or a soul evicted from its own home. To those who have abandoned their home, the road may be hard and dark and far, yet do not be afraid to steer back. If you prize grace and eternal meaning, you will discover them upon arrival.
Thank you very much, Professor Kaplan. You reminded me, you recall from me my first experience in a sukkah, which was here in Newton this past fall. And what a wonderful and moving experience that was. Our second speaker is Jacob Meskin, who is the academic director of the Mayhap program and assistant professor of Jewish thought and education at Hebrew College in Newton. Dr. Meskin received his doctorate from the Department of Religion at Princeton University and publishes on various topics in philosophy, religion, and modern Jewish thought. His articles have appeared in such publications as Modern Judaism, the Journal of Religion, Cross Currents, Judaism, Soundings, and Levinas Studies, as well as in several edited volumes. Currently, he's working on a manuscript on the role of Jewish tradition in the philosophy of Emmanuel Levinas.
I'm wondering about the connection between land and hospitality. Because we're talking a lot about the history of Jews, and we seem to have a taunting relationship with land. It's promised, and then it's given, and then it's not given, and then you come from Egypt, and you walk for 40 years, and then you cannot come in, and then there's a whole taunting experience there of 2,000 years of diaspora, if I want to bring us to these days, and here comes Israel, which of course makes this a political question too. So, if it is feeling as a stranger that makes us hospitable, what does land do to us? Or does it do anything to us? That's my question.
I have a great way of avoiding your question. That's an important academic trick. Well, I don't implicate my other fellow academics. One of the things that's interesting that I found in researching this talk was that the way this whole question of hospitality is talked about is as a legal matter, which is not at all unusual for the Jewish tradition. There are legal requirements, there are legal limits, there is debate. How much hospitality? How much should a dinner cost? Who do you invite? All the sorts of questions. What's interesting about that is your question, I think rightly, assumes that behind this endless legal conversation is an experience, which I completely agree with you. This is complex. For the Jewish tradition, the legal decisors and formulators of law are taken when they live holy lives to be the mouths through which God's continuing revelation speaks. I have no trouble with the formulation. That doesn't mean that these mouths don't have psyches attached to them and the psyches aren't shaped by their world. So legally, I can completely avoid your question. They don't talk about land at all. They just talk about the virtue of being hospitable. If you're asking, has their experience of exile shaped their interest in hospitality, it would be hard to say no. I would be pressed to go further, but it's hard to say no. There's no question that Israel changes the issue. You could even go so far as to say, I don't think this is a radically new idea, that Jews and Judaism generally don't have a lot of practical political experience. They have a lot of communal organizational experience for 2,000 years. But running a country, it's new. I'm not sure that's much of an answer to your question. Certainly the religious Jews in Israel continue to keep exactly these commandments. They read exactly the same books. I wonder, I'm going to give you the mic in a second. It's a very interesting question. Will these commandments change officially as Israeli decisors, Israeli legal authorities write about them? My guess is probably not, because it's insulated, but the feeling of hospitality may. That's why I ended in the way I ended, because it's great to have a country. Having a country, as Derrida points out, brings with it all sorts of complications. I still rather have a country. But you got to be careful, because having a country is a great opportunity to do all sorts of wrong things you could have never imagined being able to do before. So it sticks you in a very complex place. It may be that religion at that point isn't the only language you want to talk. You may need to talk politics. What's interesting to me is that the commentator I quoted on the Zohar is himself a Sephardi Jew, means he's in that tradition. And Maimonides, one of the most famous of all the Sephardi Jews, also just states, I looked it up just to make sure I actually was reading the translation right. He actually says that the most important virtue of any kind of hospitality whatsoever is the accompaniment of a guest from the home. And he says if you don't do it, you shouldn't even bother to be hospitable. Now, that doesn't prove anything about the variety of Sephardi traditions of hospitality, and that's why I will now let Ed answer.
Were you asking about Jews or non-Jews?
All Jews, actually.
I see. Well, I really don't know. All I could say is that recently I was in Paris and had a meal with African friends of mine, and he accompanied me to the metro, even though I wanted to walk around the neighborhood. So I think we can ask the question of my colleague Joseph Lombard, will be talking about hospitality in Arab cultures, and that perhaps is part of, an interesting aspect of your question. How much do Jews and Arabs in the same country or the same culture share in terms of hospitality and other issues?
I'm speaking personally. I come from a country which is Christian. And in that country, at least one politician is getting elected on the grounds, and I quote, 86% of the Irish people do not want to meet a foreigner. Now, that's not just a maverick statement. That means that the people who are voting for him are saying, I wouldn't say it myself, but I'm voting for you for saying it. You see, that's the problem. And in certain parts of that Christian country, children of 7 years of age will not stand beside another child of 7 years of age because one is a Catholic and the other is a Protestant. Two versions of Christianity. They say that at an international conference, not quite as prestigious as this one, on the elephant, several experts from around the world were collected to give their papers. And the German paper was on Loxodonta complexa, Beiträge zur sozialpsychologischen Untersuchung des elefantischen Tanzverhaltens. The French paper was on La sexualité de l'éléphant. The English paper was on elephant hunting in the 19th century in India, in the second half of the 19th century. And the Irish paper was on the elephant and my fight for Irish freedom. In the year 2002, the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party and First Minister in Northern Ireland, some of you may be familiar that this conflict that's going on between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, he was the leader of the Ulster Unionist Protestant Party, and to advance the so-called peace process, he gave a talk to improve cross-border relationships with Southern Ireland, in which he said that, I quote, "The Republic of Ireland is mono-ethnic, monocultural, pathetic and sectarian." This was to improve connections between the two parts of the country. The Taoiseach of the southern part of our country, Mr. Bertie Ahern, replied that no one would identify that description with our state in the Republic of Ireland, and he went on to smirk. "We don't have any Drumcree or Garvaghey road down south," which was another way of saying one in the orange windpipe for Mr. Trimble. That was his form of insult. Now the question I'm asking here today is, these two politicians imagined they were trading insults, but what if what they were saying was an axiom? That every single child that's born on this planet is born mono-ethnic, monocultural, pathetic, and sectarian. By birth, by nature, by biology. That's the way we are, or maybe we wouldn't have survived.
How far can that go? When we are hospitable towards the religious other, what does that mean when somebody from another religion comes into my house? Does that person have to adapt to my way of being religious, to my laws and rules? To which extent can I allow the other to be genuinely other in my house? You know, to put it maybe more concretely, to which extent can I, can we as Christians, for example, allow Muslims to pray in their own way in our churches? To which extent do I try to welcome the other by adapting myself to their rules, or does the host or does the guest have to adapt to the rules of the host in terms of interreligious hospitality? So what is the give and take, or to which extent can I really embrace and be hospitable to the religious other in their alterity, in their difference? And that is what I would like to explore. I certainly don't have an answer to that. It's becoming a more and more contemporary question also in Europe, where many Christian churches are now becoming mosques where people are praying in a completely different way, and to which extent is that really also a call to hospitality on the Christian from the Christian side? So those are some of the questions which I would like to explore. I think what we have heard so far about hospitality is indeed very true, that religions maybe civilize people into an attitude of openness and hospitality which is not naturally given. On the other hand, I think we can't also ignore the fact that religions create their own boundaries and their own blockages to genuine hospitality. So that is what I think we have to face in terms of interreligious hospitality, that the religious self-understanding, the religious way of being and rituals are themselves an inhibition to genuine and full hospitality, and to which extent are religions capable of rethinking that or considering that and stretching those boundaries of hospitality. So I want to look at the specificity of interreligious hospitality and maybe also stretch those limits that can constitute interreligious hospitality. And I will just look at it from the Christian perspective, as I was asked this morning. I think looking at it from a Christian perspective, there are largely three types of hospitality we can consider. The first type of hospitality is a kind of hospitality irrespective of the particularity of the religious other. So that is, I think, what we are indeed called to as Christians, to be hospitable and welcoming irrespective of who the other is or who the guest is in our house. But there is something also problematic of that aspect of irrespective of the other, because sometimes that also includes a kind of indifference to the other as other. So when we talk of hospitality, we usually think of the other coming into my house and conversing with the other, listening to the other, maybe learning from the other. And that's where I think hospitality should be understood to its fullest. How can I listen and learn from the other, from the guest who comes into my house? And that is, I think, where we should be stretching or pushing the idea of interreligious hospitality. And usually, I think, for most religious traditions, the idea of hospitality has to do mostly with the idea of being welcoming and generous to the other, irrespective of their own tradition. There's a sense with interreligious hospitality that when the other comes into my house, into my church, into my religious space, they are called to adapt to my environment. And that, I think, is the natural religious way of being. But obviously, we're not going to exchange very much. We're not going to learn very much from or about each other if that is our understanding of hospitality. So that is the first type, I think, of hospitality, which is the natural type of religious hospitality that you find in many different religious traditions. A second type of interreligious hospitality, I think, involves welcoming the other insofar as they are the same or similar to myself. So interreligious hospitality in that sense would involve recognizing certain practices and certain beliefs that are particular to the other insofar as they are the same, insofar as I recognize them. So again, a relatively easy form of interreligious hospitality. We welcome the other insofar as they are the same as we are. And it's a kind of tribal hospitality maybe that Father Hildeman also talked about. It's natural maybe or most convenient to welcome the other and to recognize the other in their similarities to who we are.
Thank you very much, Richard. I'm delighted to be here and to introduce the two speakers for this session. And I will introduce them separately. So I will begin with Dana Sajdi, whom I'm delighted to say is our new colleague. She is in her second year in the history department at Boston College, where she teaches Islamic history. Before coming to BC, she studied as an undergraduate at the American University in Cairo, where she did a degree in sociology and theater. She received her PhD from Columbia in Middle Eastern and Asian languages and culture. And then she also had a number of very prestigious fellowships, including a postdoctoral fellowship at the Wissenschaftskolleg zu Berlin, and a fellowship or visiting research associate position at the Department of Near Eastern Studies at Princeton University. She is the author of, among other things, of an edited volume entitled, I love the title, Ottoman Tulips, Ottoman Coffee, Leisure and Lifestyles in the 18th Century. She is currently working on a monograph entitled, another great title, I have to say, The Barber of Damascus, Nouveau Literacy in the Early Modern Middle East. I welcome Dana Sajdi.
According to the dictionary on my Oxford American Dictionary on my Mac computer, the definition of hospitality is the friendly or generous reception and entertainment of visitors, guests, or strangers. It is the element of stranger that I'm interested in here, as in the Arabic literary tradition, actually in culture, if you will, as opposed to the religious tradition. And here, I don't want to, just because I don't know about the religious tradition, but I don't know where this ideal comes from. The ideal is that hospitality should be directed at the stranger. Allowing your sister to partake in your life and property is not hospitality at all, as your sister is you. She is family. She is familiar. In this presentation, I look at hospitality as a process of rendering the stranger familiar through an act of sharing and/or of reception. Thus, this paper is about the stranger versus the familiar. And here, the familiar, I mean both familiar in its current sense and its in Latin sense, which is family, household. So in Arabic, you say, and actually it's not only today, I've seen it in medieval kind of sources, you say, the house is yours. You don't say my house is yours or this house is yours. It's the house, which means, going back to yesterday's talk about Derrida, the immediate dispossession of yourself of the house is immediate, even till today. So the idea is you have to give away your house to the other immediately. So I don't know where that ideal come from, and I don't want to discuss the sources of that, but it exists now and it existed then.
Thank you very much, Dana. We now welcome our second speaker, Joseph Lombard, who is Assistant Professor of Classical Islam at Brandeis University, where he focuses on Islamic intellectual traditions and specifically Sufism and Islamic philosophy. Joseph Lombard received his PhD from Yale University in Islamic Studies after completing his BA at George Washington University, as well as and his master's in religious studies from George Washington University. He is a scholar who has, who is working on a number of projects. He is among some of the research that I'd like to mention here. He is the editor of Islam, Fundamentalism, and the Betrayal of Tradition, a collection of essays that examines the factors that led to the rise of Islamic fundamentalism, and which contains his contribution entitled The Decline of Knowledge and the Rise of Ideology in a Modern Islamic World. He is also the editor of Study Quran for HarperCollins, and he, before teaching at Brandeis, he was assistant professor of Islamic studies at American University in Cairo. And he also served as special advisor to the King of Jordan. So we're very happy to welcome you here today. Thank you.
Thank you. I soon traveled to Shishawan, Tetuan, and various other places before I settled down and resided in Fez for several months. In each place, I was welcomed into the homes of people whom I had never met, with an openness and hospitality that often far exceeded that which I have experienced in the homes of people that I've known for many years in the United States. Now, of the memories that I have from this, which was my first adventure into the Muslim world, there is one that is most dear to me. one evening, between the sunset and evening prayers, I was sitting in the courtyard of the famous Qarawiyyin Mosque in the center of the old city of Fez. I was scheduled to leave the country in just 2 or 3 days and was enjoying this last opportunity to soak up the ambience and the barakah of this, which is for me really a magical place. And the word barakah means like the grace or blessing of God. Now, as I was sitting there, an old man, you should know in Morocco, since they get a lot of tourists, oftentimes when a white Muslim, such as myself, is sitting in the mosque or entering in the mosque, you are accosted. And you have to go through the Muslim security check. I'm sitting there in the mosque, and this very old man in worn, dirty clothes, he comes up to me and looks me up and down. And he's carrying a bucket of water to give to people. And he looks at me very sternly. He says, "Muslim?" And I answered in the affirmative. And then he says, "Abuka Muslim? Is your father Muslim?" I said, "No." He says, "Ummuka Muslim? Is your mother Muslim?" And I said, "No." At this moment, his face transformed from that of the stern inquisitioner who had first approached me to a childlike joy. And he began to weep. And he got down on his knees and he hugged me. Then he stood back up, and with what looked like great difficulty, and to my horror, he grabbed the bucket of water that he had, and he scooped that cup in there, and he handed it to me, and he said, "Bismillah," in the name of God. Now, this water was not clean. But I sat there, and I looked, and I said, "Okay, well, Bismillah, in the name of God, I've got to accept this." I really did feel like I had a choice. And indeed, unfortunately, the generosity and the hospitality of this old man came back with me to the United States in the form of an intestinal souvenir. Now, I got Giardia. I was quite ill for about a month. Nonetheless, this is really, it's still, and I think if I hadn't gotten Giardia, the memory wouldn't be so wonderful for me, but the joy of that man, the joy that he felt in offering hospitality to a stranger was something that that really stuck with me. And I'd seen many examples of it, but this was kind of the best example of it that I'd seen when I was there. And this is a person probably with no possessions, judging from his condition, probably a jalabiya or two to his name. And he felt like he had to give me something. And so it was that cup of water. But I also learned something through this. There's a flip side to this, and something that I had learned during my time in Morocco, which I think is also something that is often forgotten, which is that hospitality is a two-way street. Not only is there hospitality that one must have toward the family, the friend, and the stranger. Not only is this considered to be a moral imperative in much of the Islamic world, so too accepting hospitality from others, however mean their circumstances, is considered to be a moral imperative. It is a way in which we manifest mercy towards one another, and in which we help to bring the mercy of God more fully into the world. Because from a theological perspective, any act of mercy in which we partake is actually a reflection of God's mercy, or even a manifestation of that mercy.
Well, I think Father Clooney doesn't need an introduction at Boston College, but it's good for us to recall some of his achievements in a more formal setting. So, Father Clooney, as many of you may know, is a Roman Catholic priest and a member of the Society of Jesus. Joined the Divinity School in 2005 at Harvard. But he has taught at Boston College for over 21 years, really, before he left to go to Harvard.
His primary areas of scholarship are theological commentarial writings in the Sanskrit and Tamil traditions of Hindu India, and the developing field of comparative theology, a discipline distinguished by the attentiveness to the dynamics of theological learning, deepened and complexified the study of traditions other than one's own. He has also written on the Jesuit missionary tradition, particularly in India, and the dynamics of dialogue in the contemporary world. He is on numerous editorial boards, was the first president of the International Society of Hindu-Christian Studies, and from 1998 to 2004 was coordinator for interreligious dialogue for the Jesuits of the United States. Professor Clooney is the author of numerous articles and books, including Hindu God, Christian God, came out from Oxford University Press in 2001, Divine Mother, Blessed Mother, Hindu Goddesses and the Virgin Mary, that's also OUP, 2005, and Jesuit Postmodern Scholarship, Vocation and Identity in the 21st Century, came out in 2006. He just completed 2 other books, Beyond Compare, St. Francis and Sri Vedanta Deshika, and Loving Surrender to God, and The Truth, the Way, the Life, Christian Commentary, and the 3 holy mantras of the Sri Vaishnava Hindus, came out in 2008. His current projects include an introductory volume on comparative theology and a study of yoga and Jesuit spirituality. Thank you.
So in this Taittiriya Upanishad, in its first part, the mention of the guest comes up twice. There is a great affirmation in the 9th section of the first short book about the things that are to be practiced by proper people, educated people. Whatever else they are doing, these are things they must do. And so there's a list of such things: righteousness, learning, truth-telling, control of the senses, control of the inner self, social good context, raising a family, learning and teaching one's children and grandchildren. And then right in the middle of that list, there is reverence for the guest. And it's unexplained in the Upanishad itself, but it seems to be taken for granted that the understanding of a proper life, which has to do with living the moral code and having self-control and having a family, because in this text at least, the goal and ideal is not renunciation of the world, but rather having a proper family and having kind of an abundant family. In the middle of that is reverence for the guest and caring for the guest. The word that is used in the Sanskrit is atithi, which literally would mean one who comes without date or without prior announcement. Someone who just shows up at your door. And there's nothing else said about only a certain kind of guest or only a certain kind of person is to be welcomed, but that just as one studies the text, one raises a family, one does one's rituals, one cares for the next generation, one cares for the guest. And this is simply said, but it seems to be important perhaps because it's taken for granted. And then later on, at the end of that first part of the Upanishad, a follow-up claim is made about the guest, namely that there are certain duties that no one should be able to neglect if they are to be a proper person. There should be no fault or deficiency in duties toward the gods, toward the ancestors. Let therefore your mother be a goddess unto you. Let your father be a god unto you. Let your teacher be a god unto you. And let your guest be a god unto you. Now, what is the meaning of god or goddess in this context? I think it's not a high theology and it's not a claim about divinity, but rather that the person from whom you receive benefits and to whom you give what you can is for you a god.
Thank you, Frank, for that wonderful paper. I'm sure we all have a lot of questions and things to think about here. It's my honor now to introduce Swami Tyagananda. He's a monk of the Ramakrishna Order and is the head of the Ramakrishna Vedanta Society in Boston. He's a Hindu chaplain at MIT and at Harvard. He became a monk in 1976, soon after graduating from the University of Bombay in India. After an extensive training in Vedanta and its practice, Swamiji was assigned to the Vedanta Society in Boston in 1998, where he shares the insights of his tradition through lectures, classes, personal interviews, and meditation instruction. Prior to coming to the United States, Swami Tyagananda was for 11 years the editor of the English language journal Vedanta Kesari, based in Chennai, India. He has translated and edited 10 books, including Monasticism, Ideals and Traditions, came out in 1991, Values, The Key to a Meaningful Life, 1996, and The Essence of the Gita, in 2000. Swami Tyagananda is a member of the American Academy of Religion and on the board of the Society of Hindu-Christian Studies. He has presented papers at academic conferences, and he gives lectures and classes at Vedanta Society, as well as MIT and at Harvard University, and other colleges in and around Boston. Currently, he's co-writing a book titled Ramakrishna and the Problematics of Cross-Cultural Interpretation. So, Swami.
I use the word hospitality in the sense of any act of giving, whether it's a giving of food, friendship, shelter. And if we see spiritual disciplines as, for instance, prayer as a form of receiving, because usually prayer implies that we seek something from God. It's a movement from the divine towards the person who is praying. Then worship, in contrast, can be seen as a form of giving. That when prayers are answered, the sense of gratitude that naturally comes in the heart of a person manifests in some form of giving to the divine. And so worship as giving is the way it manifests in the ritual way in the Hindu tradition. And of course, if we go a step further, meditation sometimes is seen as the point of intersection where the receiving and giving meet.
It's a great pleasure and honor to be here, and it's wonderful that we have a linked conference with this heady material, and then we have practical work on making things, and that combination seems to me the most enriching kind. And actually, Andy Rotman, who I'm going to introduce, is someone who has worked on these relationships between storytelling and art and moral and social systems. So I'm very excited to hear what he has to say. Andy is an associate professor of religion at Smith College, and he's worked on narratives and images in South Asia, looking at them as part of social history and material culture. His two publications that I would mention, one deals with narrative. He has edited the first of a two-part translation of the Divine Stories. I won't pretend to say it in Sanskrit, which is one of the most important collections of ancient Buddhist narratives, and is the first volume in a series on the classics of Indian Buddhism that's published by Wisdom Publications. So that should be very exciting. And the other is a book that I am going to go out and read right away, because it's on the visual, how thus I have seen visualizing faith in early Indian Buddhism. And it discusses how seeing and faith function as part of overlapping visual and moral systems.
Though there is an abundance of material in Buddhism about planned giving, what to give to the monastic community, where to give it, when to give it, and how much merit such offerings will generate for the donor, the category of unplanned giving has received less attention. Yet, this category of unplanned giving is addressed explicitly in Buddhist narrative literature. Accounts in these materials of Buddhist laymen and laywomen interacting with Buddhist monks, who all too often arrive unexpectedly and at what seems to be the wrong time, form a template for Buddhist hospitality more generally. Even today, among Indians of all faiths, there is a common saying, Atiti Devo Bhava. The Atiti, the guest, is God. I've heard this said by my friends and teachers in India, whether Buddhist, Hindu, or Jain, when I or someone else arrived unexpectedly and tea and biscuits were quickly conjured. I've also heard this said by strangers on trains and buses when they share food with me or I with them. The way one treats a guest, I've been told, says a lot about one's relationship with the divine. While writing about the logic and practice of Hindu worship in central India, Lawrence Babb explains the entire sequence that constitutes puja, worship, has one overall purpose: to make the god or goddess feel like a welcome guest. Worshipping the god or goddess is a form of hospitality, and hospitality is a form of worship. Hence, the Atithi is to be treated as a god. But what does one do when an Atithi, a guest, arrives, someone who has come unexpectedly at an inopportune time? What actions in such a situation are virtuous? What, in the end, are the component parts of hospitality?
Thank you very much. When Richard wrote me and asked me to chair this panel, and he told me who was talking, I saw the name John McCraskey and I thought, well, that's familiar, but why do I know it? And I looked around the room, and there on my bedside was a book. It was a book I'd been reading without really bothering to look at the author. Called, let me get this right, Awakening Through Love, isn't that right? Yes. And it's a wonderful book. John manages to take very recondite and complex tradition from Tibetan Buddhism and reimagine it and retranslate it in both elegant and useful ways. So it's a book that I've learned a lot from, and I'm very appreciative. John is Associate Professor of Buddhism and Comparative Theology here at Boston College, and he's also Senior Advisor to the Kathmandu University Center for Buddhist Studies in Nepal. He is the co-chair of the Buddhist Critical Constructive Reflection Group in the American Academy of Religion, and an instructor in their summer seminar on religious pluralism and comparative theology. He is also the co-founder and guiding meditation teacher of the Foundation for Active Compassion, which brings contemplative training to people who work in areas of social service and social justice. So I'm very pleased to introduce John.
And the story is that Jichiri was a Zen teacher, and he was at home one day chanting sacred scriptures, Buddhist sutras, in the back room of his apartment, when suddenly a prowler broke into his apartment with sword in hand and shouted into the back room to where Jichiri was chanting his sutra. He was chanting his sutras as a religious practice. And the prowler shouts, "Give me your money or I'll take your life." And the prowler hears Jichiri from the back room. He's chanting, like this, and then he hears Jichiri shout from the back room of the apartment, "Don't disturb me. You'll find money in the drawer." So the prowler's a little surprised, but he sort of like looks around, and there's some kind of a bureau there. He opens the drawer, there's money in it. He starts rifling through it, taking all the money. And he hears Jichiri's voice shouting from the back room again, in the midst of his recitations. "Don't take it all. I need some for taxes." So, the crowd, okay, right. So he takes virtually all the money. He leaves a few yen for taxes, and he's about to abscond, leave the premises, but he opens the door, and then it finally hears Jichiri shouting again from the other room, "Don't you thank a person when you receive a gift?" So the prowler says, "Right, okay, thanks." Then he runs out. Well, as the story goes, the prowler was captured, and of course had committed many other robberies in the area, and was brought to trial. And they called Jichiri to the trial to bear witness. And the judge asked Jichiri, "Can you please bear witness for us, the experience you went through with this man? And could you testify that this man is a thief who stole from you?" To everyone's surprise, including the prowler, in the courtroom, Chichiri declares, "This man is not a thief, at least not as far as I'm concerned. I gave him the money, and he thanked me for it." The last part of the story, the thief is sent off to prison because of many other robberies he committed. But while he's in prison for several years, he reflects deeply on this statement by Chichiri. This man is not a thief, at least not as far as I'm concerned. Which enters him into the question, what am I? Who am I, if not a thief, to this man? And when he comes out of prison, so the story ends, he again visits Chichiri to become his Zen disciple. What's going on in this story? The Prowler is, in normal terms, and for the hearer or reader of the story, is a stranger writ large, capital S, right? Even as we were listening to the story, the Prowler seemed very much like a stranger to us. So the story is constructed in a way to get us to buy into it, to buy into the construction of stranger that it begins with, which is common to the world. And also an extreme example, we would defend to the death perhaps, the right to see this man as only a stranger to us, or worse. You know what I mean?